The point is, ladies and gentlemen, that greed, for lack of a better word, is good. And it might have been good for the movie Wall Street. It might have been good for box office sales. And it certainly was good for Michael Douglas, who won the Best Actor Academy Award that year. But you know who it wasn't good for? It wasn't good for Teldar Paper, the company they were taking over. And I would argue greed is not good for you as an investor. In fact, I would argue it's one of the two deadly sins to succeed as an investor. Anytime you're feeling greedy, you want to rein in that feeling. You want to pause. So let's go for a walk and let's talk about this. And most importantly, let's talk about how you can be as successful of an investor as possible. And I want to start by saying, the first step towards reaching your retirement savings goals is to save. But I've said it many, many times, and it's completely true. It's not enough, unfortunately, to just save. It's necessary, but not sufficient. And it's hard to save money. So you've done maybe the hardest part of the battle, depending on how you look at things outside of saving, right? You have to invest that money. You need to get compounding working for you. And unfortunately, compounding works two ways, right? Compounding works in your favor when you're making a return higher than inflation. But when you're making a return below inflation, it actually works against you. And there's a third-party group that's called Dalbar, and they look at the 401k returns that average individual investors receive inside of their 401k. And the sad thing is what they found was, despite having many, many offerings that have done well, like in the 20-year period leading up to 2020, in that period, gold was one of the top performing asset classes. Gold did about 10% during this study by Dalbar. And the S&P 500 did well, and international stocks did well, and even bonds did well. But you know who dramatically underperformed by 2, 3, 4 percentage points? It's the average investor. And Dalbar calls that the investor behavior penalty. And it's super, super important. The average investor barely beats inflation. During that 20-year period, inflation averaged 2.1%. And the average 401k participant that was choosing amongst these different asset classes got just a little better than inflation. They got 2.9%, just under 3%. And if you do that for 20, 30, 40 years, it really, really has a substantial impact on the type of retirement that you can have. So I want to give you the basics, things to think about, so that you can increase the likelihood of you achieving your long-term goals and your retirement goals. So, high level, it's not that difficult. Succeeding it's simple, but not easy, I should say. 90% of your returns is likely going to be determined by your asset allocation. And what do I mean by that? I mean first, your breakdown of stocks and bonds, right? Those are kind of the two main building blocks for investors. And in going deeper beyond stocks and bonds, it's what type of bonds that you own, right? I would argue you want to have bonds in your portfolio for stability, so shorter duration, super high quality, so bonds that are going to mature in 2, 3, 4, 5 years, very high quality, companies that you're very confident in, are solid, and is a Fortune, I'm not going to mention any names, but is the world's largest retailer going to go out of business in 2 years? It could, but the odds are so low. Is it going to be around in 100 years? I have no idea. But I'm very confident that the world's largest retailer is going to be around in 24 months and pay me back my bond, right? So that's asset allocation, is just high-level stocks and bonds. And then within stocks, U.S. stocks, and you have large caps, you have small caps, you have international stocks, things like that. So 90% of the returns for the average investor is going to be determined by your asset allocation. Okay, and I want to talk more about, so how do you figure out your asset allocation? Now remember, this is going to have a significant impact on how successful you are. And people think, well, do I really need a financial advisor for this? Now, I don't know your situation, but given that asset allocation is going to impact the vast majority of your returns, getting that right and working with a professional, somebody that has spent their entire life thinking about this and advising other families and help guiding them, I think it's definitely something for you to think about. And you can find a fee-only financial advisor just by Googling that term. Why fee-only? Because they have a fiduciary obligation to you 100% of the time. Now, could there be good advisors that don't have a fiduciary obligation to you 100% of the time? Yeah, there could be, but I want to know, and I want to get that in writing. So that's a question I would ask is, are you a fiduciary to me 100% of the time? Meaning you have to put my interest as a client ahead of your interest as an advisor. And you know what? Get that in writing, specifically that it says 100% of the time. Okay, so that's asset allocation. What's the other factor? I said there's two factors that are going to determine the majority of your success as an investor. And the other factor is avoiding being a forced seller in a down market, right? So the market, 2008, 2009, peak to trough was down, S&P 500, almost 60%. That's a huge, huge drop. It's very scary. And if you were a real estate developer in that period of time, right, real estate just completely dried up. If you owed money and you needed to make payments and you didn't have the cash to make those payments, you were in a world of hurt. So one way to avoid being a forced seller is minimize how much leverage you use. How much leverage you use in your personal loans, how much debt you use in your personal life and in your work life, because that gives you time to work things out. But when you have debt payments coming due, you have to figure things out quickly. And how are you going to raise cash, right? Unfortunately, when everything's down, you still have to sell things that are down. You are now, unfortunately, a forced seller in a down market. So number one is be careful with leverage, because it cuts both ways. Okay, another one is liquidity. You might not have much leverage, but if you have kids college tuition due, if you're renting a house, if you have a lot of payments coming due, even though it's not technically debt, that can put you in a bind as well, right? And then the other one, which what most people find themselves in, is they become a forced seller just because of the mental pain of seeing their account be down 20, 30, 40, 50%. Think about how many years it took you to save that money. And you can't sleep and you just want the pain to end. And that's where people really hurt themselves. And then there's regret. Right now they're on the other side of the emotion side. Imagine if you'd sold in February of 2009 and you thought, you know what, the market's got another 50% down to go and then I'm going to get back in. But instead, on March 9th, it started rocketing back. And now you're behind the curve and the market has now been up 10, 20% from where you sold. And you're like, well, there's going to be another leg down. There's got to be more pressure down. So I'm going to wait. And you know what? Some of those people did wait. And they waited for years to get back in. And that can really impact your results. I said that there were two main things, right? There's your asset allocation, and there's avoiding being a forced seller in a down market. And related to being a forced seller in a down market is striving to make good decisions throughout your life. Most people, what they find, and if you look at the Dalbar study, it's not that people don't do an okay job of picking their asset allocation initially, right? There's all kinds of guides online, but they end up chasing last year's winners. And they end up selling out of last year's losers. They sell their losers just before they're about to turn back. And that can be a very, very costly mistake. So I just encourage you, And what can the average person do to succeed on this? You know, there's people that spend their lives learning this industry that are focused on helping their clients achieve their goals. Those folks are called fee-only financial advisors. They're not the only people that can help you achieve those goals, but it's a great place to start. So that's one of the things I'd recommend. And then I'd also recommend watching this video here that talks about 8 things to stop doing as you approach 60 so that you can enjoy your life more. And this video down here that shares with you that you're likely richer than you think. It's a comparison video to how much the average American has saved. Thanks for watching.